Greetings all, F-Man here. Welcome back to another 1/400 scale diecast model aircraft review of these, both from Gemini jets, the Airbus A350-900. This is the fourth time on the channel that we have taken a look at the Airbus A350 in both its -900 and -1000 specifications. However, the A350 remains one of the most technologically sophisticated and reliable civil jets in the world operational today, and it remains one of my favorites as well. However, for the first time on the channel, we're taking a look at two A350s at the same time, in the same scale, in more or less the same livery for the same carrier. They are fleet mates, as it were, and they very nearly have sequential registrations, but not quite. We're missing one in the middle. However, we're taking a look today at the 2020 release, Delta Alpha India X-Ray November, and the 2023 release, Delta Alpha India X-Ray Papa. Can you tell the difference between the two of them? Not really, especially not from this distance, but they are both absolutely wonderful die-cast model airplanes by Gemini jets here in 1/400 scale, and they are, of course, quite lifelike likenesses of the Airbus A350, which is very quickly becoming one of the most respected civil jets in our skies in the present day in 2024. In my opinion, the A350 has actually gained a little bit more notoriety this year, particularly due to an unfortunate circumstance that befell one of them in Japan, and we'll talk about that as we go along here. However, the A350 distinguished itself tremendously that day. Although we had a hull loss, we had no losses of life because of any fault on the A350, nor did we have any losses of life on the A350 itself. So if you're going to have a hull loss, you want to have a hull loss involving an A350 because you've got a very good chance of coming away from that living to tell the tale. However, moving away from some of the morbidity factor here, the A350 is one of the most sophisticated civil jets ever built, and as I said off the top, one of the most sophisticated civil jets gracing our skies today. From every angle, it is an incredibly attractive bird from an aesthetic point of view, and from every angle in terms of the technical specifications and the engineering involved in an aircraft like this, it is absolutely impressive in many ways, and we'll get into some of those as well. However, be that as it may, please do sit back, relax, and come along with me on this survey of these two absolutely wonderful 1/400 scale die-cast replicas of the Airbus A350. Let's take a look. Before taking a closer look at these two 1/400 scale models, let's take a look at the boxes in which they come. Coming in here from screen right at obnoxiously close range, here is the box for Delta Alpha India X-Ray November, and X-Ray November happens to be the aircraft that is closest to the camera at the present moment. However, here is the box. The boxes are largely identical, as are the models, as you would well suspect. However, this is what you get. A little bit of a departure from a standard Gemini Jets box in that we don't have these typical Gemini Jets colors. Rather, we have Lufthansa colors, as you might well expect. However, otherwise very similar to what you would see on most other Gemini Jets boxes, with the rendering of the aircraft on the front panel pretty much the same size as the actual model. Airbus A350-900, and then we have our Lufthansa title graphics and the text Lufthansa 1/400 scale die-cast model aircraft in the lower right, and the lower left, of course, we have our look inside tab graphics there. Gemini Jets in the upper left, and made for collectors by collectors trademark in the upper right, and that's about it for the front panel. The right side panel, we've got the Gemini Jets logo once again, 1/400 scale die-cast model, and we have our item number for those of you keeping score at home. That is GJDLH1781 here for X-Ray November. Airbus A350-900 with our registration once again, and then a smaller rendering of the aircraft, same one as you saw on the front panel. Top panel here, we've got the Gemini Jets logo once again. Adult collectible model, warning, contains small parts, not for children under 14 years of age. Item number reiterated there, as well as a barcode. Left side panel, effectively the same as the right side panel, as we just saw. Bottom panel, same sort of thing as the top panel. However, we also have some of our selling features here. 1/400 scale die-cast model, highly collectible, superior quality, realistic metal landing gear, detailed printed graphics, as real as it gets, trademark features. Cool. Returning to our top panel here, we've got our look inside tab. However, getting ahead of ourselves, the back of the box, there is another rendering of the aircraft in a steep climb with gear retracted, Gemini Jets logo, as real as it gets. Gemini Jets brings you the highest quality precision die-cast metal airliners in highly collectible limited editions with officially licensed markings. Registration mark packaging is personalized to each aircraft to enhance its collectible value. That's a little blurb that they don't necessarily put on a lot of their other boxes because they don't put the registration of the aircraft on all boxes. That's something to note. However, highly collectible, superior quality, and all that stuff that we saw on the bottom panel reiterated here. Additionally, new aircraft being added monthly. Visit our website or follow us on social media for latest releases. Of course, you've got your corporate website and then your social media links there for Gemini Jets. Lufthansa officially licensed product, and of course the copyright Deutsche Lufthansa AG, whatever AG actually means in German. Made in China with the recycle symbol, and there's a tattletale here. Copyright 2020, Gemini Jets, Las Vegas, Nevada, USA, and remember, this is the X-Ray November box, as you can see there. So this is a 2020 release, and that means that this aircraft right here is the 2021. However, returning to the box, here is that look inside tab. What do we have when we look inside? There's the void where the aircraft would normally be sitting with our vacuum-formed plastic packaging, as you might well expect. However, we have got ourselves a traditional write-up here for this aircraft and this box. It is exactly the same write-up on both boxes, so we'll only read it once. However, this does read Airbus A350-900. The A350-900 was originally conceived back in September 2004 as a planned successor to the successful A330-340 line. The project was officially launched on 6 October 2005. It is Airbus's first design encompassing the use of carbon fiber throughout the structure of the aircraft to increase efficiency by reducing weight and improving aerodynamics. First flown on 14 June 2023. The A350's initial airline deliveries commenced in December of 2014. The A350 is a large aircraft that can seat up to 550 passengers in an all-economy high-density configuration with up to 8,000 miles of range. The baseline -900 model features a 219.2-foot fuselage length. Airbus has wasted no time in stretching the 350 and now offers the A350-1000 model featuring a 242.4-foot fuselage length, further increasing capacity. Both variants share the same 212.5-foot wingspan and feature the latest technology Rolls-Royce Trent XWB engines. Cool. Other schematics here that you can see. First of all, we have got a view of the aircraft from the port side as well as from above, and we've got some dimensions that are there delineated. 219 foot 2 inches is the length. Height of the aircraft from bottom of the main gear to the top of that vertical stabilizer is 55 feet 11 inches, and the wingspan here in top-down plan view, 212 feet 5 inches, as the box already said. Some more specs here. Delivery on this particular one, and the other one as well, obviously Lufthansa. The Airbus type, the aircraft type specifically, is the Airbus A350-941. Serial number on this particular airframe was 292. Registration is Delta Alpha India X-Ray November. The engines are two Rolls-Royce Trent XWB, which is a bespoke engine specifically for the A350. The first flight of this particular airframe was 31 January 2019, and it was delivered to Lufthansa on 30 March 2019. Maximum takeoff weight on the 350-900 is 590,800 pounds, cruising speed 566 miles per hour. The range with maximum passenger capacity is 7,860 statute miles, and there is your seating arrangement there in terms of the specific floor plan that this particular aircraft has been outfitted with. So that's really cool. And of course, that is for X-Ray November, which is towards screen left at the present time. However, not wanting to be outdone, X-Ray Papa, which is now sitting at screen left, has its own box quite obviously, and here it is from screen right. Yes, as you can see, it is basically identical to the box that we just took a look at for the other aircraft. It is identical in pretty much every way, down to the graphics, down to the captioning on all of the panels, down to everything except for the item number. As you can see, the item number right here, if we will focus on it. Yes, there we go. Item number on this particular one is GJDLH2052. And again, this is for X-Ray Papa. The other discrepancy that you will see on this box versus the other one that we just took a look at is that this one has a copyright date of 2023. So this one here, X-Ray Papa, a 2023 release. X-Ray November was a 2020 release. Beyond that, though, everything is going to be identical. There's the Look Inside tab. There's your vacuum-formed plastic packaging inside to protect the aircraft. There's your write-up. It is exactly the same write-up as we just read on the other box. No changes whatsoever. Couple of changes though relative to prior A350 releases from Gemini jets. They no longer mention the planned but later canceled -800 variant. That was supposed to be a smaller version of the 350. There was very little interest in it, therefore Airbus decided to cancel it outright, so now the -900 is the base model A350. Otherwise, same sort of specifications here as you would well expect, right down to everything else that you can see here with our listed specifications. The only differences here, though, going to be the registration for this aircraft, Delta Alpha India X-Ray Papa, and of course our first flight and delivery dates are going to be different. 31 January 2020 for X-Ray Papa, 29 February 2020 it was delivered to Lufthansa. Otherwise, exactly the same specifications everywhere else, as they are essentially identical aircraft in every other way except for registration and the very beginnings of their history. However, they are now both flying for Lufthansa nowadays, and they continue to do so here in 2024. Some more detailed specifications and a little bit more history on the 350. In addition, of course, to what the Gemini Jets box told us. We talked about its introduction into service on 15 January 2015. That happened with Qatar Airways following the type's first flight on 14 June 2013. Therefore, the aircraft has been in service from 2015 through the present day, with 602 having been manufactured as of 31 May 2024. Its overall type, of course, is a twin-engine, ultra-wide-body airliner, and of course, it is manufactured by Airbus. Today, it is predominantly used in passenger service by Singapore Airlines, Qatar Airways, Cathay Pacific, and Delta Airlines. Delta being very unique in that they are the only American operator of the Airbus A350. All of the other operators are hailing from across the pond in either direction, if you're speaking as an American, but Delta, being so far the only 350 operator in the United States, makes them very unique in that regard. The aircraft also has an extremely good safety record, and to date we have only had one hull loss of an A350 in active service. Unfortunately, that hull loss did lead to 5 fatalities. However, none of those fatalities were aboard the 350, and as a matter of fact, the 350 was so good at outperforming what is legally required of it that an evacuation of the aircraft was possible up to 18 minutes after the incident occurred. Of course, I am talking about Japan Airlines Flight 516, which occurred at Haneda Airport in Tokyo on 2nd January 2024. The Airbus A350 was landing at Haneda, where it had collided with a de Havilland Canada -8 that was operated by the Japanese Coast Guard. The -8 had erroneously entered the active runway without clearance, and the Japan Airlines A350 made its landing and collided with the -8 on the runway without clearance. The entire complement of the -8 were lost. However, no one aboard the A350 was lost, and all of the passengers were able to be evacuated safely despite an extensive fire which ultimately consumed the vast majority of the fuselage, and with over half the exits being inoperable due to the way that the aircraft came to a stop and of course the extent of the fire once it became evidently clear that the aircraft needed to be evacuated. Not all the exits were usable, not all of the emergency slides therefore were usable. However, everybody got off of that A350. There were 15 passengers who were treated for non-life-threatening injuries per result. However, that goes to show you, the A350 was put in a situation that it was never designed for. No, an airplane is not designed to be on fire on the tarmac. However, if that does happen, there are ways that regulators and designers try to address that to reduce loss of life. And in this particular circumstance, the A350 exceeded the legal mandate of being able to evacuate a fully loaded passenger aircraft within 90 seconds by so much of a margin that I don't even know how to describe it in terms of how many times it exceeded the legal margin. 18 minutes over 90 seconds of what it's technically required to do. That is remarkable. And a lot of that has to do with the construction of the A350, as we'll get into. However, the predominant use of composite materials such as carbon reinforced aluminum alloys as well as carbon fiber itself, which of course is a carbon layup that's impregnated with resin to give it its structural rigidity. Those features, as well as lighting on board, as well as power systems, as well as things like upholstery that perhaps don't catch fire as quickly or they don't outgas as quickly when that flashover phenomenon happens with an enclosed fire. All of these things conspired to be able to get people out of that aircraft, first of all, but beyond that, to prevent the fire from spreading so quickly that even passengers who allegedly were hesitant to evacuate were ultimately able to be persuaded to get out of the airplane. And that took 18 minutes. That is absolutely amazing. Eventually, of course, the aircraft was consumed by fire, but that happened long after everyone was able to get out. So that is absolutely amazing. Hats off to Airbus for that. However, technical specifications here on the A350-900. Despite this aircraft being an ultra-wide-body transcontinental airliner, only requires 2 people in the cockpit to operate it. Of course, Airbus, they really were trendsetters in terms of a lot of computer and automatic systems in these aircraft to try and help out the flight crews. The A350 is probably the most high-tech airliner in the skies today. Only 2 people required to operate this airplane in normal circumstances in the cockpit. Typical seating here on the 350-900, 315 passengers. However, that can greatly vary depending on our carrier and how a carrier has decided to outfit a specific aircraft. 440 seats is the exit limit ultimately for main deck passengers, and that's the only passenger deck here on the 350-900. Lower deck cargo capacity, we can fit 36 LB3s or 11 filled pallets. Overall length on that fuselage therefore is 219 feet, 219.2 feet or 66.8 meters. Wingspan is 64.75 meters, that's 212.43 feet. And that wing angle, the sweep angle on those wings, is 31.9 degrees. Aspect ratio on the wing is 9.49. Overall wing area is 442 square meters or 4,760 square feet. And the overall height of the aircraft on the ground here with gear extended and sitting on the gear is 55 feet 11 inches or 17.05 meters. Overall fuselage dimensions here in terms of width, 19.6 feet or 5.96 meters, and it is 19.98 feet high, that's 6.09 meters. Cabin width, remember this is taking into account your pressure vessel, so your pressure bulkhead here, not necessarily the ultimate cabin width, is 5.61 meters or 18 feet 5 inches, and that is with 18-inch wide 9 abreast seating arrangements. However, we talked about the carrier variants there. Some carriers, rather than having 9 abreast seating have decided to go for 10 abreast seating in the A350-900, and in that circumstance your cabin width is 5.71 meters or 18 feet 9 inches, and that is with sacrificing a couple inches in your seats themselves, 16.8 inches, 43 centimeters, but allowing for 10 abreast across that center aisle of the aircraft. So interesting there. Maximum takeoff weight on the 350-900 is 283 tons or 623,908 pounds. Maximum payload capacity is 53.3 tons or 118,000 pounds. The payload can vary though in terms of, are we talking about cargo, are we talking about passenger, or some variant in between there, anywhere between 101,300 pounds to 124,300 pounds. That's 45.9 to 56.4 tons. Fuel capacity is 37,200 US gallons. That is 110.5 tons, 244,000 pounds, or in cargo capacity here, if we don't have any passengers at all, that can go up to 44,000 US gallons exactly. So very interesting there in terms of what we have with our fuel capacity. We do have the introduction of cargo only variants, the 350F specification of 350 starting to come in, so some of these figures are varying a little bit. The operational empty weight is 142.4 tons, that is 314,000 pounds. Typically though, that is between 134.7 and 145 tons, and that of course in old money is 297,000 to 320,000 pounds. The minimum empty weight there is 115.7 tons, 255,075 pounds. The engines, as we had discussed from the box, Rolls-Royce Trent XWB engines there, bespoke engines for the A350. Maximum thrust at sea level is 84,200 pound-feet, that's 374.5 kilonewtons. Cruising speed is Mach 0.85, that's 488 knots, 903 kilometers per hour, or 561 miles per hour. Maximum speed, though, is Mach 0.89, that's 513 knots, 950 kilometers per hour, or 591 miles per hour. Overall range, 8,300 nautical miles, that's 15,372 kilometers, or 9,600 statute miles. Your cargo variants, though, they can extend that a little bit, depending on load, of course, to 9,700 nautical miles, that's 17,964 kilometers, or 11,163 miles. At maximum takeoff weight, we require 8,500 feet of runway, that's 2,600 meters exactly. Our maximum landing weight, we require 2,000 meters, 2 kilometers exactly, or 6,600 feet of runway. Service ceiling, though, 43,100 feet, that's 13,100 meters. Very, very cool. Certification dates here in terms of the A350-900. 30 September 2014 is when it got its type rating officially, and those were for the Rolls-Royce Trent XWB 75 engine specifically. We have more recently had the introduction of the A350-1000. That one came into view in terms of being certified on 21 November 2017 with the XWB-97 engines, and of course we do have a 350F specification coming into service as well. That actually got its type rating though at the same time as the 350-900 on 30 September 2014, but different engine specifications for that one. That is the Rolls-Royce Trent XWB's -84 specification there. So interesting stuff, very impressive specifications overall here on the A350. Still pretty much exclusively a passenger aircraft, however we are going to start seeing more and more of the 350F configuration here for cargo service. So very cool stuff, and it is definitely one of my favorite current airliners, and specifically for that Japan Airlines incident that happened earlier this year. I don't know if any other airliner currently in service would have performed as the 350 performed on that day, and that is just an amazing thing to consider, that no fatalities on the 350, despite it, first of all, enduring a collision at landing speeds, and then enduring a fire, and then maintaining structural integrity enough, first of all, to keep the fire away from the people, and number two, to stop the fuselage from failing due to the fire for a whole 18 minutes. That is absolutely amazing. Let's take a closer look, though, at these wonderful models of a wonderful aircraft. Stopping our rotation here, let's take a closer look at the models that present themselves to us. This is the fourth time on the channel that we've taken a look at an Airbus A350. The first time in a few years, though, and the first time that we've taken a look at two of them together, certainly two basically identical stablemate A350s. However, as you would expect from Gemini jets, you are seeing the typical construction characteristics that you get in 1/400 scale from them. Both aircraft, despite one being a 2020 and the other being a 2023 release, they are both 100% die-cast through and through. The only plastic parts on any of these are the landing gear, as in the landing gear struts and the wheels being plastic. The engine nacelles, the fan blades, and the pylons that the engines are attached to are also plastic. And of course, the landing gear tires are rubber. Beyond that, though, everything else is die-cast. From the fuselage to the wings to the empennage, everything you see is die-cast. Basically, everything with paint on it is die-cast. And that is really, really cool to see. As you can tell here from the aircraft that is closest to us, there is no shortage of detail anywhere on either of these models. We're taking a closer look here at X-Ray November, so this is the 2020 release. However, it doesn't really matter. Everything that you see on one, you will more or less see identically on the other, because, well, they are effectively identical aircraft. But here from a starboard side quarter view here from nose on, you can see that everything that you would expect to find on a contemporary A350 model, you are finding it here in this 1/400 scale form factor. Everything looks very nice from the paint to the graphics. The tampo printing, of course, is comprising pretty much all of the painted on detail work, from the title graphics to the windows, the window line there, our doors, our cockpit windows, everything that you can think of more or less is tampo printed on. Of course, there are no stickers or water slide decals anywhere on a contemporary Gemini jets model, so that's par for the course as you would expect. But everything looks absolutely wonderful here on both of these models, as you would well expect. You've also got some separately applied antennas on the dorsal side of the fuselage. There are no ventral antennas here on the 350-900, at least not as we see them here in Lufthansa colors, but you do have spike antennas over top on the dorsal side of the fuselage, in addition to a SATCOM antenna there over the rear quarter of the fuselage there, heading toward the empennage in the tail section. So really cool. Looks like we have got three spike antennas there, and then of course we have got the SATCOM antenna, the dish antenna there in the middle of the aft two. Very, very nice. Very good proportion of everything as well. Everything looks straight and level as it should, with no issues with finish or fitment here, as we can see here on X-Ray November, at least from this view. Looks absolutely marvelous. Taking a look here from the starboard side of X-Ray November. There we go. Now the details that we alluded to in the previous cut start to come to fruition a little bit more clearly. First of all, you can see the very distinctive nose section on the A350. It does not quite have a geometry reminiscent of any other active service airliner today. It's really, really cool. I have always personally likened the nose shape on the A350 to the TGV, the high-speed train that is the pride of France. And, well, you can definitely see that there is some resemblance there if you're at all familiar with what the TGV looks like, or perhaps even the newer models of the Acela here in the United States. That blunt nose shape, which is there to cut through the air, but also not to create any undue turbulence further down the fuselage. So that is interesting and very distinctive. Definitely one of the features that is very indicative of the fact that you're looking at an Airbus A350. And of course, Airbus being largely based in France as well, although Airbus, of course, is a multinational consortium with contributing companies contributing from all over Europe. But the French tend to identify with Airbus quite a bit, and they do have a base of operations at Toulouse, so yeah, we can say it's a French aircraft for the most part, so the resemblance to the TGV perhaps is a little bit more than skin deep, but I digress. Moving aft from the nose tip, obviously you can see cockpit windows there in the very distinctive raccoon mask of the cockpit windows. That has to do with the window glazing and also the type of glass that they're using. Obviously, they're concerned with anti-glare and anti-UV penetration just to help the pilot's eyes a little bit. But of course, because this airplane is going to be traveling at speeds upwards of 500 miles an hour in cruise, it is possible for you to run into debris, whether it's just particulates or ice or larger things such as birds. And well, that glass needs to be mighty strong to resist impact and of course to resist erosion just from ice, water, anything else like that. So they've put a lot of thought into designing the cockpit windscreen glass, and that's one of the side effects. It gives the A350 that very distinctive raccoon mask appearance, and it's very, very cool. Beyond that, though, just a couple of Lufthansa livery-specific things that we will see in sub-miniature detail later on, but you can see that we have got the blue bird here on this newer Lufthansa livery on both of these aircraft. It used to be a yellow bird, in addition to the vertical stabilizer featuring a white bird now to stand out against the blue that they're using on the vertical stabilizer. But both of them used to be yellow birds in times gone by, no more for the newer liveried Lufthansa aircraft. However, you've got Star Alliance detail there just behind the right side cockpit windshield. Really, really cool. Beyond that, we have got our R1 door here on the starboard side of the aircraft. That is replete with the shut line that you would expect to see, in addition to some tampo printed detail of the little window in there, as well as the armature to actuate the locking mechanism to facilitate opening and closing that door. That's really cool. And that is effectively the same detail that you're going to see across all of the main entry-exit doors on this aircraft here through R2 and R4, and then of course your L1 through L4 doors on the port side of the aircraft. They all look similar with that armature detail. It looks really, really cool. Continuing aft and down a little bit more, you can see in this portion of the fuselage we have got ourselves some static ports and some ground service equipment there. You can hook up there when we are on the stand at the gate. Very nice to see all of that. Not at all unique to the A350, for example, but very nice to see that here, of course, all rendered in tampo printing. Additionally, this being the starboard side of the aircraft, this is also where most of our loading doors are for the lower deck cargo compartments. So we have got ourselves a cargo door here on the starboard side, just below the window line there, which is below the forward portion of the fuselage where the Lufthansa title graphics are. And then, of course, we also have that in the aft portion of the aircraft here. This particular view, it's a little bit occluded by the starboard wing, but you can see right in that area we have got our aft cargo door. So a little bit more detail on the starboard side of most airliners than you see on the port side, because that tends to be where most of our cargo doors are on modern airliners, but that is really cool to see. Additionally, you can see we talked about the wing rake angle, the sweep angle on the wings there being a little over 30 degrees. You can see the implications of that here with our wing tip with the end fences there, our scimitar winglets with the very extreme upturn in the extreme outboard face of the wing there. You can see where that wing tip is in relation to the wing spar. That's quite a distance fore to aft from our perspective, and that's due to the wing sweep. That's really nice. Additionally to that wing sweep, though, and of course those winglets, which are another distinguishing feature of the wing on the A350, of course you can see the nacelle for our starboard engine. Really cool. Very nicely shaped and very nicely affixed to the wing structure there. You can see that the nacelle is affixed to a pylon, which is thereby affixed to the wing, but the nacelle looks very good. Nice de-icing ring there. You can see that's the silver portion on the forward edge of the nacelle. That all looks good. And of course we have got our hot core of the engine that is terminating in a cone shape there at the rear of the nacelle, protruding out quite a ways from the nacelle actually. The rear portion of the nacelle will actually break apart and slide back relative to the forward part of the fuselage, and that is how the thrust reverse works on these XWB engines, but very nice detail nonetheless. You can also see here that we have got a red line telling people do not go forward of that point if you're close enough to the engine when the engine is running, otherwise thou shalt be ingested, and that's not a good call home to your next of kin. However, also some more static ports there for ground servicing and potentially some manual overrides there for bleed air and things like that, should ground crews need to help out with either starting or shutting down those engines on the stand. So really cool. Beyond that, below our wing, we have got our landing gear here. You can see that we only have two axles on the main gear on the 350-900. This is another way that you can distinguish the 900 from the 1000 if you're taking a look at these airplanes and you're not quite sure which variant you're looking at. The Dash 900 only ever has two axles on the main gear. Of course, it's got two bogies because it's got two main gear, one on each side. But the Dash 1000 has three axles on the main gear. So if you're looking at a 350 and you see that it has two main axles, that's a Dash 900. If it has 3, then it's a Dash 1000. I don't know what the 350F is going to have in terms of its main gear. Dimensionally, it's going to be closer to the Dash 900 than the Dash 1000, so I would presume it's going to have 2 main gear axles. But higher gross weight on takeoff may determine having 3 axles there. So that little identification strategy may not hold up when you see the 350F. However, the obvious distinguishing factor for the 350F is going to be it's going to be mostly devoid of cabin windows. So that should be a very nice telltale nonetheless. But very cool to see all of this. Moving aft toward our empennage area, you can see here on X-Ray November, the aircraft closest to us, very nice detail there with our, gotta say, simple and austere, but still striking Lufthansa livery. Lufthansa have always had a livery more or less like this. The colors have varied over the years, but still the same general design. Very simple, very elegant, and very distinctive. So, you know, you're looking at a Lufthansa aircraft as well. I like it. Obviously, we've got that very dark blue background there, the overall paint color on the empennage. That starts down a little bit lower on the fuselage, right at the bottom of the fuselage, and it wraps around underneath the both sides, and then it extends all the way up to the top of the vertical stabilizer, incorporating the bird. It used to be the yellow bird, now it's a white bird here on the tail. It is a blue bird on the nose because, well, contrast, white on white, you won't see it, just like you won't see blue on blues. But very nice and looks very, very cool. And of course, all of the paintwork here on the model looks wonderful as well. No faults in there. Terminating with the empennage there, obviously we have got our horizontal stabilizers in this area, and then the tail cone slightly occluded by the horizontal stabilizer, but that has been painted in silver, just as it would be, because that is housing your exhaust for the auxiliary power unit. Gas turbine engine in its own right, providing hydraulic pressure and electrical power on the ground when the main engines are not running. Looks really, really cool to see all that. And I've got to say, Gemini Jets, you've done a great job once again on a 350. Taking a look first at the rear of X-Ray November. We talked about X-Ray November in some miniature detail so far, so we'll continue to do that here for the rear section of the aircraft. What do we see? Well, there is our livery line, as we talked about. You can see where the white of the main and majority portion of the fuselage terminates, and it leads into the dark blue at the tail cone. Looks very nice, and it looks symmetrical and uniform as it should. Very, very cool. You can see how the vertical stabilizer, pretty much the faces of it occluded in this view because we're looking at the trailing edge thereof with our rudder control surface, but that of course extends all the way through the vertical stabilizer. Horizontal stabs though are white, as are the main wings, and you can just see a little bit of the shut line there associated with our elevator control surface. Of course, you don't see any of the, they're not trim tabs per se, but you don't see any of the arc profile where the whole horizontal stabilizer can trim fore and aft, just to help with cruise and fuel efficiency and overall balance, really. But that is also there in this particular model as well. Looks cool. Beyond that, you can see that we have got ourselves that tail cone that is tapering to a rather sharp point there at the extreme aft end of the aircraft, punctuated by that silver exhaust outlet for our auxiliary power unit. That looks very, very nice. Additionally, here from this angle, you can see how the airplane is sitting on its landing gear, what its overall attitude is. It is pretty much straight and level as far as I can see on camera, as well as by eye. You can see our main landing gear there. They look to be symmetrical in terms of their overall length, and you can see that they are both sitting squarely on the ground, supporting the aircraft accordingly. Looks very good. Additionally, you can see the overall shape of that wing. I really like that. Of course, you have got the winglets on the wing tips, and then they come down to the main profile of the wing, going all the way to the fuselage, and then of course you see the complementary equal and opposite on the other side. Looks very, very nice, and I love all of that. The A350, and again, I really like the aesthetics of this aircraft. Not only does it look unique, but it just looks very elegant. That wing shape almost looks organic, and of course the smoother and less abrupt you can keep the overall profile of a structure, the more airflow tends to like it. So that's obviously been the guiding philosophy of the design of the A350. And those dividends that it pays in terms of aerodynamic efficiency and therefore fuel economy. It also helps with aesthetics as far as I'm concerned. Very much like it. Additionally to that, you can see the exhaust sides of our engines. These engines here, the XWB engines, they are very good in terms of their overall efficiency, and part of that is because they are very high bypass. Modern turbofan engines, they have higher and higher bypass ratios relative to the core flow, the hot flow of the engine, because the more bypass you have, the more efficient you can make your engine in that you're moving more air without having to move more fuel through that engine. So that's really, really cool. Side effect of that is, though, from behind in particular, you can see clear through those nacelles, and it's difficult to see from this particular view, but Gemini jets have bothered to model that attribute with these engines here in 1/400 scale. You can look through the exhaust side of these engines all the way through and see light coming through on the other side through the intake side of the engine. So that is very cool to see. I love all that. And when you have those true to life details, even when it's scaled down to such an extent as it is here, and it still works, I really like that. It's definitely a sign of something that's been thought out very nicely, and they've managed to maintain those attributes all the way through to, obviously, production and distribution. Looks very, very nice. However, we do have a second airplane sitting right here. No, we haven't forgotten about this one. Of course, this one is X-Ray Papa. It's full registration Delta Alpha India X-Ray Papa. This one is the 2023 release, and it is in basically every other way besides its registration identical to X-Ray November. And therefore, it's going to be our analog to take a look at the forward section of an A350-900 here in Lufthansa colors. And from what we can see right now, looks absolutely marvelous, with everything that we took a look at from that front quarter view still evident here. But of course, because we have got somewhat of a different angle now with a different side of the aircraft visible, we are going to be able to discern some more details herein. Taking a look from basically directly nose on here on X-Ray Papa, you can see that very unique and distinctive nose shape of the A350. Not quite blunt, but not quite particularly angular either. It is a very unique shape and, of course, very distinctive to the A350. As we remarked on earlier about those cockpit windows, now you can see them here in their full extent. You can see that raccoon mask that I keep calling it, but you can see why, I would presume, as to why I have come across that particular analogy as to the appearance of those cockpit windows. Looked very, very nice nonetheless. But also you can just see the overall presence of this aircraft here in 1/400th scale. This one, it is a little bit different in terms of the fitment of everything. X-Ray November, I think, is a little bit better in terms of the overall symmetry of fitment of things like the empennage in particular. If you take a look here in the slightly out of focus portion of the image, you can see the vertical stabilizer and then the horizontal stabilizer flanking it on either side. It doesn't quite look straight. It's a little bit cocked over to screen left from my particular angle. Does it detract? Maybe a very little bit. It's not really something that you're going to notice by eye unless you're being particularly critical of it, as we are right now. But beyond that, that's about the only defect, I suppose you could call this. Although, again, I tend to be a little bit more accepting of things like that, particularly in the smaller scales, because, well, it's just difficult to make these things. But be that as it may, what you can see here, though, in terms of our tampo printing details, in addition to the cockpit windows, you can see that we have got a shut line around the radome there. That portion of the nose, the very extreme forward nose tip, that would be removable so that you could service the weather radar in there, should you need to do that. So you can see the shut line around there. And in addition to that, you can see on either side of the nose, we have got ourselves our air data ports. Of course, these models are a little bit too small to model things in 3 dimensions, like pitot tubes and angle of attack sensors, but that's where you would find things like that on the A350. You'd have your pitot tubes for your air data in terms of your air pressure, your temperature, your density, therefore, so you can calculate your altitude that way, and of course your air speed speed is going to be measured that way. And of course your angle of attack sensor, that vane that's going to be effectively freewheeling in the airstream, and then the aerodynamic force is going to impart pitch into your angle of attack sensor, and that's going to extrapolate your angle of attack and feed that to the cockpit instrumentation. All of that would be found in that portion of the aircraft as well. The actual sensors themselves obviously would be way too small to render in 1/400th scale, but definitely something that you can see here in terms of where they would be. Looks very, very cool. Also from this view, you might just be able to see on screen right the port side engine. You can see how we've got that bright spot in the upper center portion, slightly off to the right of the engine. There is your visual evidence of actual bypass here on these 1/400th scale engines, and you might be able to see a little bit of it on the starboard engine on screen left as well. Evident on both aircraft because, well, they are identical with identical engines, but always cool to see that. Means that the fan blade details there are separately applied. It's a whole separate element there that is then mounted into the core of the engine, as it were here. But very nice to see all of that stuff. Additionally, on either side of the fuselage, in the wing roots area, just flanking the fuselage, you can see that we have got those triplet landing lights. Very, very nice to see all of that. I suppose that's also integrating a runway turn-off light, if you want to call it that. But yes, very nice to see that sort of detail as well on these models. And again, everything here tampo printed, and everything here very, very small in 1/400th scale. So whenever you have little details like that plainly evident, I definitely like it. It's a sign that they have thought this through very nicely, and well, the finished product definitely looks very good. We've had to reposition a bit here so that we could take a look at the port side of one of these airplanes. This is X-Ray Papa, and the port side here looking very similar to the starboard side, both of itself as well as that of X-Ray November, as we had taken a look at previously. However, some of the details here that are not evident are evident on the starboard side of both aircraft, namely the cargo loading doors in the lower deck there. The big cargo doors are on the starboard side of the aircraft. They are entirely missing, for the most part, from the port side. The only lower deck entrance is this hatch right here, just forward of where the fuselage really starts to cut in upward on itself to form the tail cone structure, but that's there. Not entirely sure what that's actually for. I don't know if that is avionics in terms of an electronics bay, or if that might be for laboratory service or for some other purpose, but whatever, that is here on the port side of the aircraft. Beyond that, though, pretty much everything else more or less a mirror image of what we had seen on the starboard side. Of course, going back to the forward section of the fuselage, you can see in that cockpit area, as we slew over, there we go. Very nice detailing in there as we lose our focus a little bit. There we go. Very nice detailing there on the port side of the forward section of the fuselage there, punctuated by, of course, those cockpit windows that we have waxed poetic about a little bit too much. And of course the extreme nose tip, the radome there, the shut line between the removable panel as well as the permanent structure of the fuselage. And of course you do have this area right here where you've got your air data ports there, or at least where your air data sensors would be mounted. Really cool. You've got the Lufthansa bird just below and slightly after the cockpit windows as you had on the starboard side, and you've even got your Star Alliance logo there as you had on the starboard side. L1 door here, detail there, including the little yellow details there, and they're on the L1 and L2 doors. They were the same on the starboard side as well, and that is even replete with your armature there for the latch-unlatch mechanism. Of course, all done with tempo print detail. Looks very, very good. Toward the midships area, you can see where we have got our wing spar coming in toward the center of the aircraft. That all looks really, really nice. You can see as we reposition with everything. There we go. There is the central portion of the aircraft with our wing spar. It looks very, very good. You can see where the wing comes into the fuselage. That looks nice. Everything straight and level here in terms of the main wings here on X-Ray Papa. That's very nice. And of course we have got our port engine nacelle as well, just as it would be on the starboard side, just mirrored. But all of the details that you saw on the starboard side are the same here on the port side, right down to the little red stripe right in this area here. Thou shalt not pass forward of this position. And then, of course, you've also got yourself your exhaust side of the engine with your center cone, everything exhausting out the middle, as you would well expect to see. Landing gear as well. There's your landing gear door, obviously with the landing gear being extended as we are. It looks very, very good. And of course, you have got those 2 axles on the main gear here on the -900 A350. Very nice. L3 and L4 doors, they're looking marvelous as well, as you might well expect. And then, of course, we have got that little hatch right here. Again, not entirely sure what that actually is, but it's here on the port side of the aircraft. And then, of course, your empennage there with your Lufthansa bird, vertical stabilizer, horizontal stabilizer, everything looks absolutely fine. Other details here that we couldn't quite see on the other side, although they were evident. You've got here registration, which is just barely occluded by the port wing, but you do have your flags here of Germany and of the European Union that are modeled in there. Very, very small, but they do look correct, and you do have the stars visible there on your EU flag, and of course you have got your black, red, and gold stripes for the flag of Germany. Very nice to see all of that here, and of course the other aircraft on the port side is utterly identical but for the registration. Very, very cool to see all of that. Now going freehand here on both of these A350s, and I've got one elevated here on the display stand just so that we can take a look at these a little bit more closely, each for what each one is individually. Here we are on X-Ray November, and you can see what we have got going on here in terms of our front end detail here on that forward section of fuselage. It looks very, very cool. Got ourselves our title graphics as you would have seen on X-Ray Papa, but here on X-Ray November, everything pretty much identical as you would well expect to see. A couple things that are different here though, and because we're a little bit closer in, you can see this now. We have some text below those forward passenger cabin windows. The first line reads Airbus A350-900, and then below that is the name of this particular aircraft. Some airlines name their aircraft, Lufthansa obviously one of them. The name of this aircraft here is Göttingen. That is the name of a city in Germany. So very cool to see all of that, and very cool to see that Gemini jets have rendered that legibly. Very cool. Beyond that, everything else, as we had already seen, still plainly evident here. Very cool, like all of that. Seeing all of that here on X-Ray Papa, just raised a bit, as you might expect. Looks very cool. Slightly different lighting conditions because the angles are a little bit different, but you can see here basically the same detail as you would have seen on the other one, but just a little bit higher up and a little bit closer in frame. Very cool. The name of this aircraft, obviously we have got those same 2 lines of text as you would have seen on X-Ray November. The first line says Airbus A350-900, as you might well expect it to say. However, the name of this particular aircraft here in Lufthansa colors is Braunschweig, which is, I learned recently, just German for Brunswick. So, yeah, very cool. Of course, that is another city or other municipal level agency, organization, settlement in Germany, but very, very cool. Nice to see as well that this airplane has absolutely no trouble sitting on the Gemini Jets 1400 stand. There's the stand hole underneath, and there's even a little bit more detail to see underneath there. Some NACA ducts there. They're just done in tampo printing. Nothing is passed through. Nothing is actually molded into there in terms of the bottom side of the fuselage, but looks good. You can also see underneath the wings we have got ourselves those canoes, those fairings that cover underneath the flap actuation armature just to make sure that everything is covered up for aerodynamic purposes and not to generate untoward amounts of drag. Very cool. And also you can see the overall geometry of that wing shape. Absolutely glorious. Underneath the empennage as well. Looks very, very nice. And I gotta say, looks really good. The only fault, other than what is potentially a little bit of an assembly fault on the empennage there in terms of the vertical and horizontal stabilizers maybe not being 100% straight and level, right here on the registration here on X-Ray Papa, we have got the ever slightest bit of a paint misapplication there. We got the D, which is fine, but the A is a little bit cut off on the bottom. The I is also a little bit cut off on the bottom, as is the X. The P looks okay, but beyond that, that's it. That's the only fault really, especially in terms of painting on either one of these models, which is really something unique. And again, I can totally excuse that because of how small those details are and how intricate that tampo printing really has to be. So, okay, maybe it's a portentous place to have a little bit of paint loss, but at the same time, from this perspective, being only a couple inches away from the model, you can see just how much smaller that's now appearing to your eyes. And yeah, you're not going to see that unless you're really looking for it. So I can excuse that as well. And taking a closer look here from the starboard side of X-Ray November, you can see what we have got going on here with our detailing. Looks very, very good. There's that text on the starboard side as well. Interesting to see, though, that those yellow decals that we saw along the left side doors, not here on the right side door. So that's a difference between the port and starboard sides as well. But looks very, very nice. And of course, moving arrears toward the aft end of the fuselage. There's your registration of the flag of Germany. Cool. Very, very nice. Wings. Got that. Overwing detail. No overwing exits on the A350, but nice overwing detail nonetheless, including some no-step markings. Looks good. And then, of course, you've got the top of the fuselage with that detailing showing you where you've got the assorted antennas over the top of the fuselage. Very nice. Also got your beacon strobe light in red. And then you've got your antennas moving aft. Looks cool. The other thing that I will note, though, take a look at the color of the wings here on X-Ray November, and then compare that to the color of the wings here on X-Ray Papa. They are both white. However, X-Ray November, being the slightly older aircraft in terms of being an older model, little bit more of an off-white cream tint to the color of those wings versus the ones here on X-Ray Papa. This one is a 2023 release. This one is a 2020 release. Is that some sort of difference in the paint application or the mixes of paint that Gemini jets were using in 2020 versus 2023? I don't know, but it is definitely a difference by eye. Is it earth-shattering? No, it's really not, but it definitely is something that is noticeable. Beyond that, though, these two models pretty much 100% identical, as you would well expect them to be. And yes, very, very cool to have models in the same scale that are fleet mates. They are not sequential registrations. There would be an Oscar in between. But close as makes no difference. You've got these two A350-900s in Lufthansa colors. These airplanes absolutely would be operating together at some point, and they probably see each other, I would say, quite frequently in the real world. So cool to have all of that. Definitely like both of these. So there they were in 1/400 scale by Gemini Jets, the Airbus A350-900 here in Lufthansa colors both. The epoch of the twin-jet widebody has well and truly arrived. Nobody is going the way of quad-jets anymore. Nobody is going the way of tri-jets anymore, and that's been the case for several decades by this point, as much as we may lament the passing of the tri-jet. But particularly with the cessation of production of aircraft like the Boeing 747 last year, the future definitely looks like it's going to be twin-jet wide-body, and the Airbus A350, therefore, a quintessential example of that overall design scheme. It is one of the most sophisticated and technologically advanced airliners gracing our skies today, and I believe aircraft like this are going to be the trendsetters for any design evolutions that we may see in the forthcoming years, because an aircraft like this, in addition to the computer electronics and the high degree of automation that Airbus more or less pioneered when they first started to introduce themselves into the civil aviation market, this aircraft also makes great use of composite materials for large portions of its structure in terms of structural components, as well as taking advantage of some of the material properties of those composite materials in that they're a lot lighter and they can be shaped into all sorts of different forms as their function may require, and therefore we can cut down on weight and we can cut down on aerodynamic drag. Particularly things like parasitic drag from shut lines and rivet lines and things like that, because we can prefabricate a lot of these larger components now in one piece rather than having to join several aluminum, for example, structures together. The wings, for example, for the Airbus A350, they're produced in one piece, and then they're transported in the Airbus Beluga in that gigantic oversized cargo bay. We've taken a look at the Airbus Beluga before on the channel as well, if you're interested in that. But really interesting to see a wide-body twin jet, which, okay, that design schema is not really all that remarkable. I mean, after all, we've had aircraft like the Boeing 767 and Boeing 777 for an awfully long time now, so what's so remarkable? Well, the A350 takes that design archetype and architecture and moves it squarely into the 21st century with those new production techniques and those new materials being used by those new production techniques, which are basically necessitated in a large part by those new materials. But this airplane, although it is an example of the finest of cutting-edge engineering in terms of materials and in terms of design, it is also now becoming one of the finest examples of what happens when engineers get to be engineers and they design an airplane, first of all, to fulfill its primary function of being a people carrier across the continents, but they also remember that it is carrying people, and therefore it has to perform even in environments and situations that may not have been anticipated in the overall design plan, such as what happened that day in Tokyo in January. The Airbus A350 is probably the only aircraft in the skies today that could have had the outcome that we had on that day. And for that reason, as well as for the actual design and performance attributes of the aircraft as it is intended to function, the Airbus A350 definitely is extremely worthy of its place in the premier echelon of today's civil jets. I do thank you all very, very much for watching. That's all I've got for you today. F-Man saying thank you, and of course, we will see you soon.